Business is the April 25th, 2023 minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Daly, Ms. Duncan. Any comments, corrections, concerns? Seeing none. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Next is we have informational reports. We'll move and receive to refile unless you have any questions, unless Dr. Blair, is that your small business micro grants you'd like to discuss?
Yes. So if you remember in October, we announced startabusinessgp.org. We have had 149 people enter the platform where they can get information on the questions they should be asking themselves and access to mentors. If they get through the platform and get 2 mentors to approve, basically give passport stamps, they are eligible for this micro grant. We had 19 applications last week on the 15th. Of those, 10 were eligible, so they had gotten all their stamps. The Advisory Committee for Entrepreneurship and Small Business reviewed those 10 and scored them on a rubric and gave out 6 awards. 2 were women business owners and 2 were minority business owners, and 2 are outside of the city of Peoria. They're out in the county. So we are very excited about that. We do believe that at the July 15th meeting, we've got enough people in the pipeline that the 4 grants we have left over, we can easily give out at that meeting. So it is possible that we could use more money. I think almost definitely use more money for grants after July during this fiscal year.
Any questions for Ms. Blair? Next up, we have a resolution, West Peoria Township parcel correction. Is there a motion to put this on the floor? Ms. Allison, Ms. Williams. Scott?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you recall from your January meeting earlier this year, we brought to you as an informational item a request from Limestone Township and the city of West Peoria, who is closing out the remnants of West Peoria Township, about 34 parcels that are not contiguous with the city of West Peoria, but are prior to the voters of West Peoria Township approving a referendum to dissolve the township, were in West Peoria Township. Under the township code, the county board has the ability to, in essence, assign these 34 parcels to another township, Limestone being the most applicable and appropriate. Between January and today, we had to have a public hearing. We also had to do a public notice for that public hearing on 3 separate occasions. So we had that public hearing. There was no testimony other than what the prepared remarks I read into the record. The city administrator from West Peoria and the Limestone Township supervisor were present but did not offer any testimony. And so that statutory requirement has been achieved. What we are recommending here is that you adopt the attached ordinance that will allow for these 34 parcels to be recognized as part of Limestone Township. Both the county clerk's office and the election commission, even though there are no voters on any of those 34 parcels, will be sufficiently notified pending the county board's action. That way tax codes can be updated and voter registration rolls can be updated. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Yes, please.
In the ordinance in your packet, there are a couple of references to the statute, the applicable statute. Because lawyers are annoying, I would like an amendment. The section that's referenced that says 10-25 needs to actually say 10-5. So I know. But so I would ask for someone to make that amendment to the ordinance.
So we'll vote on the amendment get to the main one. Any questions, comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All right, we'll do this again. All those in favor? As amended. Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. So next up we have discussion. So that way we can have a longer discussion for ARPA. How about we do standing committee reports prior to the ARPA discussion for the sake of. So first up, Ways and Means, Ms. Duncan.
Yeah, Ways and Means, we did have a resolution for monthly delinquent taxes, and it was voted unanimous. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had one zoning case where it's up on Lake of the Wood Plaza where the owner would like to have a tavern, which he'd be selling high-end wine and beer and then have gaming in it. There's quite a few people, I think, at the ZBA that were against it. It did pass ZBA unanimously, and it passed ours unanimously. The owner made some concessions to try to appease the homeowners and renters around the area, and was really trying really hard to work with them. So I think it's a good case to pass the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next up, County Operations, Mr. Ricker.
Yes, county operations, we did have a resolution that we moved to a discussion, and it was the comprehensive human capital management study, or the employee compensation study. We had a lot of great discussion with the committee on that topic, and we will have another follow-up on that to decide what our next steps are. But so we did not take a vote, we moved it to discussion.
Thank you. Any questions for Steve? County Health, Mr. Renault.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just had informational items only.
And Public Safety, Ms. Allison.
We had 3 police service agreements that we approved and 1 grant for PCAPs for the mobile unit.
And last but not least, Ms. Williams, Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had FY 2023 budget appropriation of ARPA funds. We had to appropriate into the 2023 budget $235,937 and some change. That passed unanimously. Do you want me to continue on rules?
Sure. Rules.
Okay. So rules, we had an amendment 1, which is a change order to do with the Health and Human Service campus, how to handle those, and that passed unanimously.
Perfect. So next up is the discussion of the American Rescue Plan Act policy. So we have a slide deck that staff has prepared. Some of the direction that we would like to get out of the board today, as you know, when we got to the health department, about a $2.6 million difference of how the money is allocated. So I don't know if we'll solve everything today, but we need to get some sort of direction to at least get that back to even. And then if there's other things that we would like to discuss on that, we need to discuss that. But really today I would like to get staff some sort of direction on how to move that money around to allocate for a plan to go forward. I think you'll see Administrator Sorrell has a very good slide deck and some options to present. And if we can't agree to any type of consensus today, I think what we would do is some sort of polling system to try to figure out where members, I know everybody, after talking to many of you, some things have higher rated than others and vice versa. So just some sort of direction, and we'll have a hopefully good open conversation about these ARPA dollars. I know we've been talking about it for a while. So with that, Mr. Sorrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you should have at your desks 3 items. One is a copy of the slide deck, and the other 2 are spreadsheets that have various projects on them. Those are also on your iPads if you refresh good reader. So let's, and because you have this information, even though you're just getting it, a lot of it is a repeat for the board members that were here in 2021, but I will walk through it somewhat quickly, so we can get to the meat of the discussion. But we are going to cover funds available, the eligibility and ineligibility of how those dollars can be used, some other American Rescue Plan information, funds appropriated and expended to date, and then the policy discussion itself. So in terms of funds available, the act as approved by Congress was $1.9 trillion. Most notably is counties across the nation received $65.1 billion of that total. And the state of Illinois received $13.232 billion. Here in Peoria County alone, our direct allocation, which came in two tranches, was $34.8 million. The city received $47 million. All the governmental entities that were eligible to receive money to add up to about $86 million, just a shade over that, here in Peoria County. In terms of how the dollars can and cannot be used, the Act had four basic funding objectives. The first was support urgent COVID-19 response efforts. Remember, this was done in the spring of 2021. Second, replace lost public sector revenue. Third, support immediate economic stabilization. And fourth, to address systemic public health and economic challenges. So those are the objectives. Those are the goals of the Act. And then in terms of how those dollars could be used, there are four primary buckets that a project or a service could be classified as. The first is responding to the public health and negative economic impacts. Second is providing premium pay for essential workers, not exclusively our own. Because if you remember, essential workers had a broad definition. Third, replace public sector lost revenue using a formula which we'll talk about here in a future slide. And then investments in broadband, sanitary, storm sewer, and water infrastructure. So looking at those four categories, let's look at responding to public health and negative economic impacts first. There are a total of 7 ways that dollars in this bucket can be spent, including services to contain and mitigate the spread of COVID-19, behavioral health care services, payroll and covered benefits for public health, healthcare, and human services and public safety staff. Also, to deliver assistance to workers and families, support small businesses, speed the recovery of impacted industries, and then to rebuild the public sector capacity. Under the premium pay for essential workers bucket, there are 4 eligible categories of how the dollars could be spent. That's providing premium pay for essential workers, prioritizing low and moderate income workers who face the greatest mismatch between employment-related health risks and compensation. The key sectors included healthcare, grocery and food services, education, childcare, sanitation, and transit. And then they must be fully additive to a worker's wages. Under replacing the public sector lost revenue, we could use those dollars to ensure the continuity of vital governmental services by filling budget shortfalls. We could also, there's a revenue loss calculation that we'll go into that has an adjustment of 4.1% annual growth. And then any recipients, such as us, would have to recalculate that revenue loss at multiple points in the program. And we've got a graph here in a future slide that shows you how we've been doing that. In terms of what is included and excluded in eligible uses, things that, in terms of how we calculate the lost revenue, so things that are not in the calculation, federal transfers, intergovernmental transfers within our budget, any utility revenue doesn't apply to us because we don't operate any utilities. Any refunds or other correcting transactions and proceeds from a debt issuance, so if we had issued bonds during the period, those don't count. And liquor store revenues if we were receiving any revenue from liquor stores. What we can include is pretty much everything else that's not listed. So that's taxes, fees, and other revenues to support public services, any fees that we generate from economic activity here in the county, and any other component units, which in many municipal governments would be like a civic center or a library. Doesn't apply to us. So this is the graph that shows that calculation. This has been updated on an annual basis. What we're able to put towards this category is what's shown in the red here, which is the extent of revenue loss. You can see in 2020, it was 15.64 million. 21, it was 17.28 million, and last year it was 13.90 million. So how can these dollars be spent? They can be spent on a wide variety of governmental services that are providing aid and services to our citizens. Any pay-as-you-go infrastructure or capital improvements, cybersecurity, healthcare, and public safety. As we've talked about before, it cannot be used on debt service. So we cannot pay bonds with this that we may have with this source of money. We also cannot use it to build up any reserves or rainy day funds, nor can we use it for any settlements for any litigation that we might have. Under investing in broadband, sewer, and water infrastructure, there's 5 components here. So we need to focus on households and businesses that don't have access to broadband. We can fund projects that deliver reliable service. There is a minimum standard for broadband, and that is 100 megabits per second for both uploading and downloading. We can complement broadband investments made by the private sector through the Capital Projects Fund. We can include improvements to infrastructure such as buildings and upgrading facilities and transmission, distribution, and storage systems as it relates to those utilities. And then eligible uses that are aligned to environment, the EPA's Clean Water Act revolving loan fund and the Drinking Water State revolving loan fund. There's an added component that looks at qualified census tracts. These are equity-focused services. And within these geographic areas, there is additional flexibility in how we can use the dollars as it relates to addressing any health disparity, investment in housing, addressing educational disparities, and promoting healthy childhood environments. The qualified census tracts in Peoria County, and there are 16 of them, are entirely within the city of Peoria, and it is roughly everything south of McClure. It's not 100% of that, but in general, most everything south of McClure is in a qualified census tract. So that additional level of flexibility is only applicable within the purple shaded census tracts that are on the map here on the screen. So in those areas, we can address, as I said, health disparities through a variety of means. We can address housing in neighborhoods through a variety of means, educational disparities, and promoting healthy childhood environments. In general, what the funds, all 34.8 million, we cannot use it to reduce our net tax revenue. So in other words, you can't use these dollars as an offset for a tax break. We can not make extraordinary payments into a pension fund. We don't have to worry about that. IMRF is fully funded. As I said earlier, we cannot use it to build up our reserves, and we can't use it for debt service or legal settlements from litigation. Part of the process that the U.S. Treasury put into the rulemaking was we needed to do some citizen feedback. And one of the questions that we asked, we were only able to get 293 responses, was to rank the spending priorities from first to last, or from highest to lowest. We saw that as a percentage, or on average, on a 0 to 4 point scale, so 3.18 being the highest rating, was investing in water, sewer, and broadband, and then going on down to the lowest rank, which was replacing lost public sector revenue. Obviously, this was done when the Treasury was still writing some of those guidelines, and it was probably difficult to articulate in a very short survey as to what that really meant. But that's how the ratings for the 293 residents of Peoria County that completed the survey shared with us. So additional ARPA-related information for you. Key thing to point out here is all of our reporting requirements. Heather does that on a quarterly basis, and these funds are subject to our single audit, which is the portion of the audit process that looks at all of our federal awards. We've had many milestone dates up to this point. The two most critical remaining are by December 31st of next year, so 2024. We have to obligate the funds, so that is telling the U.S. Treasury how we're going to spend the dollars. And based on the policy discussion that we had in 2021, we've already done that. We have the ability to modify that reporting to the U.S. Treasury based on actions the board takes, based on this policy discussion today. And then by December 31 of 26, every last penny has to be spent and actually out the door. It's not like we would be waiting on the last invoice from a vendor and that check would maybe be cut in January. That doesn't count. We actually have to physically expend all the funds by December 31st of 26. Whatever we don't expend does go back to the U.S. Treasury. So the American Rescue Plan Act had several other buckets of funds available. The next slide, just summarize those. If you look at this slide alone and you add up all those dollars, it's $58.625 billion. If you add up the next slide, it's a little over $76 billion. So on the two slides alone, there's $134.635 billion worth of funds available for other purposes. In addition to ARPA, since ARPA was enacted, there's been two other major pieces of federal legislation. The first is the Inflation Reduction Act. This is just the county's portion of the funding, or what counties might be eligible for. If you add up everything on this slide, it totals $410 billion. Most of this, though, is going to be through either program grants or through competitive grant-making programs. The other piece of legislation is the bipartisan infrastructure law. If you add up everything on this page, it's $552.3 billion, including $65 billion for broadband that is going through the U.S. Department of Commerce. What we shared with you back on these next three slides back in 2021 was some guiding principles from the Government Finance Officers Association. It's actually an international organization that has state chapters. Both Heather and Julie are members and are active in the Illinois chapter. And we wanted to share again with you what we shared 2 years ago. A couple of highlights from this slide in terms of the guidance that GFOA gives on ARPA, acknowledging that ARPA is money that is temporary in nature. So guidance that they have would be that we would want to avoid creating new programs that then have to be sustained after ARPA, after we've expended all those dollars. And an example of those type of investments is critical infrastructure. A second guiding principle deals with scanning and partnering. Here, we want to be cognizant of what the state of Illinois is doing with their ARPA dollars, so that we can either, collaboratively work to use those dollars, on similar projects, so that we get more bang for the buck, or at the same time we want to, avoid working at cross purposes. And then at the regional and local level, having that same awareness as to what other units of government in our community and our region are doing with their allocations. Third and final piece of guidance from GFOA deals with taking time and careful consideration. This is something the board did in 2 policy sessions in 2021. And one of the recommendations here is the middle one, is that whenever possible, those expenditures from ARPA should be spread over the entire qualifying period, which is through, it says here, through December 24, which is the obligation date, so that we have good financial stability. All of you are here every month, and so you know in the informational section of your packet for this committee every month that there are 3 reports that Heather generates and we provide to you. The first is this one here, and this is actually the same one that's in your packet. In fact, this slide, the next 2 are from this month's packet in terms of what information we're providing to you, and then anybody else, or the member of the public that happens to review the committee packet, including this dashboard type of one-page report that shows graphically, how we're spending those dollars to date and whatnot. So let's jump to how we've been spending and how we've intended to spend the dollars. The first up is what came out of the policy session in August of 2021. This was done before the U.S. Treasury guidance was finalized. We had draft guidance back then, and so what we did here is you can see we actually had it put into 5 buckets that have some cross purpose but are not exactly aligned with what the final rules were for those 4 primary categories we talked about earlier in the slide deck. But back then, the board's policy decision was $2.4 million in change for social determinants of health. That was effectuated by an intergovernmental agreement between the city of Peoria and ourselves, creating the Health Equity Fund. $1 million for small business assistance. And we've heard from Member Blair earlier in the meeting about some of the work that is being funded by this bucket. Back in August of 21, we had pegged originally $14 million for the Health and Human Services campus and another $14.9 million for capital improvements. Those numbers have obviously moved around based on prior action of the board. We had said $2.5 million for broadband, and then at that point the board was undecided on premium pay, both for county team members and for other essential worker categories. This probably here's the most important table as we get towards the policy discussion. This is a summary of how the money was planned to be used, how it's been expended, and what is remaining. It is divided into the 4 categories or buckets that is in the final rule. So you can see, and those are columns denoted by the icons, and then going across we've got the original planned use, which would be from the prior slide, what was actually expended as now audited or nearly audited as we've submitted the annual comprehensive financial report to SIGIC for their review. So that was what was spent last year. Third is what you've appropriated this year. And then through April 30th, how much of that appropriation has been spent. And then that would leave whatever the remaining balance would be used, that could be used for, and what you might want to move around. And you can see that that totals a little over $6.9 million. So talking with Chairman Dillman in advance, we put forth. I put forth to him a couple of policy questions, a couple of things that I do want to point out that are going to increase that $6.9 million number a little bit in terms of what we would recommend, and then the board obviously can go in that direction or go in a different direction. But first, how do we want to allocate those remaining funds across the eligible categories, and how should the earned interest income be allocated? So quickly tackling the second question there, if you recall, as part of the Health and Human Services Project approval, there was $500,000 of money from the Capital Project Fund injected into the project. The caveat being that the work that the county treasurer has done on investments, combined obviously with higher interest rates, has allowed us to earn a significant amount of interest income on the ARPA dollars that are still in the bank. Under the federal guidelines, those interest income dollars are free and clear. We can use those on whatever we want. And there is no deadline to which we want to use those. As we talked about during the discussion on the Health and Human Services Project, we talked about a recommendation that we would likely make in the annual budget process this summer and fall, that we would take the first $500,000 of that interest income and put it back into the Capital Project Fund to recapitalize those dollars that were done. Again, that is our recommendation. As Chairman noted, the impact that you made, or the impact that was made to the American Rescue Plan Act fund, because again it's a separate fund, by fully funding the Health and Human Services Campus Project, is that we took $2,639,416, we'll just say 2.6 and change, from an undetermined bucket, but put it towards the Health and Human Services campus. A couple of things that we would like to recommend to you as to start off this process is the following. In conversations with the city manager and the public health administrator, and looking at what the Health Equity Fund is really going to be capable of doing, you had originally approved, and it's in the intergovernmental agreement, that we would fund 4 years at $600,000 each year for a total investment from the county of $2.4 million. The current year, 2023, is year 2 of that, so there's $1.2 million in the fund right now. We're prepared to recommend that be all that the county put in to the Health Equity Fund. The city, the same, so we're essentially cutting the Health Equity Fund in half. That would add $1.2 million back into the pot, so to speak, right off the top. Based on, I would say that the other item, based on other feedback that I think the chairman has received and I've received from board members, is this year there is $700,000 appropriated for the acquisition of the election commission. That, again, the source of that is ARPA, and so we would recommend delaying that purchase at this time and putting that back into the pot as well. If you do those two things, you've reduced that $2.6 million by 1.9, and so really all we're looking now at is roughly $740,000 of a negative outcome that we're looking to find. I think lastly, before I turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, is I think once the committee and the board decide how much money you would want to allocate for capital projects going forward, we would recommend that the infrastructure committee be charged with identifying and prioritizing which of those projects should be funded.
And if you look at the infrastructure sheet that is in front of you, it does give you a timeline. I know that's been a concern of not seeing things that shovels actually moving, but we should start seeing some bids come out here this summer. So some of those projects are a go, and then other projects are in design phase for them to become shovel ready. So, and again, those numbers are 2 years old. So we should see cost overruns even from the projects on here, not actually see all those projects come to fruition. But they would go back to infrastructure for Chairman Salzer's committee to discuss. So we'll open the floor to discussion for the report that you heard, but if the board is agreeable, we're down to about 740,000 that we need to move around. Sir Renaud.
Thank you. I guess my question is on the amount we have set aside for broadband. Now, I fully support broadband, but what I'm afraid of is duplication of efforts like Scott had mentioned before. I know that the Illinois Broadband Lab and the Illinois Office of Broadband have been working together in this area, putting feet on the ground, identifying where there's a need. I just want to make sure that if what we are investing in is not being duplicated by another agency, and if there's potential of $65 billion coming out of the federal government, could that money be better used somewhere else?
Scott, and maybe could you give an update to the board on the study and the money that we've already spent for broadband so we know where that's at the moment?
Happy to, Mr. Chairman. So if you remember earlier this year, you awarded a contract to a consultant called Design 9 to do an engineering feasibility study. It will provide, from an engineering standpoint, along with citizen input versus high-speed internet service providers, actual on-the-ground information in terms of what is available out in the county and in the city. So that contract is a small six-figure contract. So, and we've not received the first billing from them yet. So if you go back to the slide that's on the screen here, and you can see that in the broadband category, we've appropriated 1.3, but 0 has been spent through April 30. That's because we haven't received that billing yet. So that's a small six-figure contract in the $100,000 to $150,000 range, if memory serves correctly. Ms. Williams is actively engaged in that, along with other community stakeholders. What that will do is then that study will give us, from an engineering standpoint, the roadmap for where we have broadband infrastructure deficiencies. And there may be portions of the county that have internet, but it's not high-speed internet, which is what the goal of the program is. We could use some of the remaining dollars to do a number of things. Up to this point, prior boards have said that you do not want to be in the pipe and wire business, so you do not want to actually own the broadband itself. There are other counties that are doing that. An example is Lincoln County, which has several small municipalities, and they're using some of their ARPA money for middle mile broadband, where they will connect those municipalities largely from a public safety perspective. They're actually going to lease the operation of that infrastructure back to a service provider, and then the service provider will hopefully recoup the cost of the lease that they're paying Lincoln County by getting subscribers. But they'll also be on the hook for the last mile, so getting out and away from that hub and spoke model out into the rural portions of Lincoln County. That's one way to do it. As I started off by saying, prior county boards here have said we do not want to own the pipes and wire. We would rather partner with private sector providers and either be the conduit for federal funding so that they can expand their own infrastructure, or work with them through federal grant-making purposes and state grant-making purposes to do the same. Now, obviously, we haven't had this discussion since the new board was seated, and so if the board wants to go in a different direction and get in the pipes and wire business, we can do that. But it is not an inexpensive endeavor to do that, as it's several $1,000s. Sharon, remember, was it like 10,000? Was $100,000 a mile to put fiber in the ground. It's really a policy decision for the board if you want to continue to kind of be a conduit and a partnering role versus actually owning fiber that would be put into the ground. And the study that Design 9 is doing is going to tell us where that fiber needs to go in our community. I would say lastly, on this topic, up to this point, the board has said you wanted to focus on the infrastructure side of high-speed internet and broadband versus the affordability. We have two components to broadband because we do have parts of our community, mostly in the city, but also in some of our smaller municipalities. Thanks to our schools, most of our municipalities have good high-speed internet. Not all of them, but most of them. And there may be portions of the city of Peoria or any of those other municipalities where the internet access is there, the high-speed internet is there, but the resident cannot afford the subscription fees. Up to this point, we've been focused on the infrastructure. Again, that's a policy decision for this board as to whether or not you want to continue down that path or if you want to pivot to do both or pivot completely away from infrastructure and just focus on affordability.
Ms. Allison.
Having also been at that meeting, I think the important part is that with the other programs that are out there, like Connect Illinois, in those situations, the county would still be a partner in that. So it wouldn't be one or the other. A lot of these programs are only available if there is a local partner. So in areas where it's not worth it for a company to invest in laying that's where the county can provide a subsidy to help make sure that the residents who don't currently have access would have that. And this study or this map that is being done, I'm trying to find the date. I think it was the end of June. Is that right?
Yes,
do you remember?
It was. I apologize. You were we were physically at that meeting, and I should have noted that.
Oh, that's fine. But so I mean, we should have that information, by midsummer at least. It's not like a far out situation.
Ms. Blair.
As we're talking about broadband, do we have to go the fiber route? Can we, I know that there's other options like cellular data that might make more sense in rural areas. Has that been discussed?
That's part of Design 9's scope of work.
Mr. Ricker, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I guess, I've been on this broadband project team and see the needs, and I think it ties into some of the other, I'll call it social determinants of health. If we subsidize broadband for communities that can't afford it, probably are the same communities that are sitting today, excuse me, where we call it a food desert, and broadband could create the access for those residents who don't have local access to grocery store type food to order food and have it groceries and have it delivered if they have access to broadband and training and knowledge how to use it. The second piece is on the medical side, that same communities that fit those zip codes and challenges, we can help those communities get medical service now, because you have what was called telehealth, but it's now broadband doctor pharmacy services. So I think there's some real value that ties to that element. The next piece of social determinants of health is kind of that education piece for families that live in those areas that cannot afford broadband to access education, access knowledge, do online schooling if they're an adult taking continuing education. So I think there's a lot of tie-ins there. And then the last tie-in I'll talk about on that piece of social determinants of health is the job capability. Some of these residents, if they had access to broadband, most every job application now requires you to submit online application. You can't just walk in and fill out a paper form. So to apply for a job, to search for jobs through the job search space, you need access to internet to see if there's jobs that you qualify for, you can apply for, and then some of the jobs actually are remote jobs where you could do the job from your residence if you had reliable high-speed broadband, which then would help improve the economic situation for those families. So that's under the social, I'll call it social determinants of health. I might be expanding the term a little bit. And then the last piece is for businesses. We had Denise Jackson here last month talking about the Minority Business Development Center, where they're training and teaching and helping people start businesses, understand what you need. Any small business, if they're in a city or out in the rural part, you really cannot run a business today without access to the internet, from point of sale transactions, credit card. So again, broadband has a lot more touch points than just saying, we gave you high speed. So to me, I think the broadband is very important when you start scoping all the other aspects of the community we can help. And then back to Jennifer's comments, to get some of these federal grants and the $65 billion out of federal, you have to have some level of matching if it's a 90-10 and 80-20. So, the 2.5 million was really, and the 2.5 million from laying or investing in infrastructure doesn't take you anywhere. We all kind of agree. But if you can use that as community match money or local match money to get some of that 65 billion, I think there's some value. So I'd like to, I'm an advocate to keep the money where it is until the study is done. At the end of June, we can have a better roadmap to figure out what are the right elements that we should be contributing to. And if the roadmap says we don't need 2.5, then we can pull away. But I'm going to strongly challenge we don't pull that money at this point. Thank you.
So as we talk about everybody that's important to the pockets of money to keep, can I also make a suggestion? Can you suggest where you would want to see that money come from? Because the money is going to have to come from somewhere, and we've continued to pull from capital projects from here. So I'm just looking for suggestions. If you don't like it from one pot, what other pots you would like?
Perfect. Thank you for the lead in. So one of the capital projects that number 2 in the page with the blue header or the blue section, the IT cybersecurity of $596,000. There's been a contract awarded. To my knowledge, the IT department has a very healthy reserve, like $7 million approximately. Probably 200% of their reserve. I would suggest that reserve, unless that reserve is being held for a capital improvement or an IT planned investment, I would suggest that we have the IT cybersecurity one transferred out of ARPA funding and take it from the reserve from IT. So that'll pick you up this $596,000 of the 700 and some that you're short, so you still are only short 200.
Administrator Sorrell.
Member Ricker's correct. IT has, the fund has a sizable balance. Most of that is being saved up for a variety of capital improvements, but not all of those dollars are obligated or predetermined for an identified capital improvement. Whether or not there's let's round off and say 600,000 available. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but as the discussion continues, the power of electronics and high-speed internet here in a building like this, I can ask CIO Little give me a better idea of how much would be available in terms of unobligated fund balance. So let's continue the discussion, and we'll come back to that once I get a response from Mark.
Ms. Williams.
Yeah, we were Steve and I were discussing that between us because that one stood out to me, obviously with the $7 million they have in reserves. Ponying off that, I'd almost like to see some sort of a strategic plan or something from IT of what there is planned for $7 million in reserves. Also, let's talk about broadband. I am definitely in the camp of spending it on infrastructure. I think infrastructure is more permanent. Affordability is, to me, seems like a temporary thing. We're just helping people temporarily until the money's gone, right? So for me, the infrastructure, I think, would just be more important to go that route. Scott, is there, the city of Peoria, are they doing any affordability with their ARPA dollars?
A significant amount of their ARPA dollars are going into, I would say, the broad category of addressing a wide variety of poverty type issues.
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to agree with both my colleagues to the right. I'm not saying we couldn't take money out of the broadband, but I would rather wait till the study come back to tell us, because else we could find out we really need to put more money into that instead of less. And so before I would vote to take any of that out of that, I would want to have that study back just to make sure that we're doing it the right way. And I think, like Member Williams said, that probably infrastructure is better to spend it on, or something along that lines, to make sure it was there versus something that's going to be used up very quickly, making it affordability.
So, Mr. Chairman, that was quick. There are enough unobligated reserves in the IT fund to absorb that project. So we'll require board action to fund that project from a different source, but that can be done.
So that would leave us, if everybody's in agreement, about 140,000 to cut to get us at least back to zero. Hold on, Steve. Let me just get, because other people have. Ms. Daly.
I guess I don't have a suggestion right this second about where to cut, but I'm really glad that we didn't just haul off and spend all this money, because I have so much more information, I believe now, for example, about our facilities than I had in 2021. And I feel like, for example, we have recognized the social determinant of health by building a $23 million health campus. And so I am in agreement that we do need to reduce that amount at least by the proposed 50%. But I also think that we have a great responsibility to take care of our facilities, namely the courthouse plaza, the jail, and as a tip of the hat to Member Kelch, the Salt Dome. And I am far more interested in doing those infrastructure projects than I was 2 years ago.
Thank you, Member Daly. Member Salzer.
I was just going to comment on the election commission, because everybody who was on the board that voted for the 22 budget, the election commission was in that budget. And $700,000, some of you know some of the problems that are out there, and you can speak against it and so forth. Now, I'm certainly going to support the recommendation that we don't do the election commission, but I want to make it perfectly clear that it had been in our project improvement, and that was in the 22 budget. Also, looking at this, they do have some problems. They need space, and that was one of the recommendations that I made to Farnsworth when they got busy for the Health and Human Services campus. Was our committee, the Facilities Master Plan, that Bob Bido and I was on with some very knowledgeable people. We found out that one of the number one problems of most of the people throughout our county working for us, they needed space. If we're going to take that $700,000 and not do anything with the election commission, which is a great location. Now, some of you may disagree with me, but you talk to election judges on election night who live out in Elmwood and live, Princeville in that region, they can get in by way of the Dwight D. Eisenhower interstate system, because he was the guy responsible for our interstate system. Actually, they're happy where it is, because that helps them get in quickly. The people that ride the bus, they think it's convenient. You go over there, vote yourself. My wife and I, ever since that's been in existence, we voted in person at the facility. We think it's great, good to park and so forth. We've also invested $920,000 already in that. And I asked, as the chairman one time, to some other knowledgeable people on the board, I said, why are we spending so much money fixing this place up and so forth? They politely told me, because we intend to buy it. So those are just some things that all of you should know. But if we're going to help that jail, and Linda mentioned that jail, most everybody in here has toured the jail. Now, we lost one sheriff because of some of the problems at the jail. We don't want to lose another one. So if that $700,000 is going to help Sharon's big project, I call it hers because it has been hers. The Health and Human Services, if it might, in some other cuts that we're going to talk about, help the jail. Because let's face it, if we don't do something out there at the jail, there's a lot of mechanical problems that we don't see. Yes, we can walk up to the courthouse, and it's the showcase of the county, and we can see, the fountains and so forth. But there's also some other problems internally here at the courthouse. The public doesn't see those. So I'll take that recommendation from Scott and his staff and so forth, and whoever else is responsible. I'll bypass that $700,000.
So there's, just let me make another, because one of the directives for budgeting purposes is try to get back to close to zero as possible. So if we look at this for the sake of discussion, there's $1 million left for demoing and redeveloping the Gift Avenue property. I don't believe that it will be $1 million to demo that property. More than likely, that extra money was in there for some redevelopment purposes. There's been talks about trying what to do with that property, but we could probably take that line item down to $800,000. And I know there was a request from the EDC committee to get $50,000 more for some grants. It's up to you how you would want to do it, but you could probably lower that by $250, put $150 into that, and give $150 to the economic development standpoint, and still probably be in good shape. And then we should be budgeted around, and that will buy us time to see what the plan with broadband does. If that's agreeable to the board, that would give staff really just want to give some sort of direction from a financial standpoint of how these pots of money, and I know that that does not cover all the projects that you see on this list for infrastructure committee. Mind you, when we've gone to the board for the health funds and employee bonuses, capital is always first thing to get cut, and in COVID years, the first thing we cut was all capital projects. So when you look at this, I think it's truly important, and I commend this board for the amount of time and effort that they've done to look at our facilities and see in what disrepair some of them got. So I'd really like, when we going forward, to keep these capital funds for capital funds, not knowing that they're going to even buy as much as what's on here. So that should get us back to leave 800,000 for that, give 50,000 more for businesses, and 150 for that, and we should be covered if everybody's in agreement. Sorry to interrupt, but this week working the numbers. I want some sort of direction for staff. Member Rosenbaum.
Out of curiosity, not that we have, that I'm asking to take any money out of it, but how much money on interest are we making total, or do we, by the time we spend all the money, do we have kind of a ballpark figure of the interest money, and where are you wanting to put I know you said capital improvements, but that's a big sheet here. Kind of where were you thinking of where you're wanting to spend that at, so we kind of got an idea where that money would be going
So, great question, Mr. Rosenbaum. Madam Treasurer, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think to date we actually now have a little over 600,000 in interest income. Oh, 980,000. There you go. So we're going to push over $1 million. So there is a substantial nest egg there that we have, and obviously we're not going to spend our remaining ARPA balance in one day. That's going to actually get drawn out over the remaining life of how long we can spend it, most likely. So that means Nicole will continue to earn interest throughout that entire time, and as interest rates fluctuate, she'll be able to maximize the investments that we get, and hopefully that number will be even larger, or it should be even larger over the course of time. How we might use those dollars. Obviously, the recommendation of the first 500 off the top is to recapitalize capital projects. I think how we, and that goes into the reserves of the capital project fund, so it's not identified for an individual project or series of projects that might be on this list. The remaining, I think, I think the board should have a discussion about whether or not you actually want to put that into the reserves of the capital project fund and set it aside for when the public facilities sales tax goes away at the end of the decade, so that you actually have money in a nest egg to continue doing capital improvements when that guaranteed funding source goes away. And that funding source today is about $4 to $4.5 million. About half of it goes to pay bonds for the museum. The other half goes towards capital improvements of our own. When that revenue stream goes away, that the ability to do $2+ million a year in capital improvements on our own facilities goes away. So my initial reaction would be to since there are no restrictions in terms of how we use it and timeline, I would say we start building the nest egg for when the public facility sales tax goes away initially. If the board would be dead set on spending those dollars, then I would work with Mr. Salzer and the infrastructure committee to identify and prioritize various projects that are on the list that are on the sheet, in one of the sheets in front of you, and then we can move ahead with spending those dollars accordingly.
Member Ricker.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I had a couple other quick asks. So under the guiding principles slide of partnering efforts, we mentioned here in a couple comments about the city having money, and the city is a big portion of Peoria County in the volume. It would be nice to have a current list of where they prioritize. So if they're doing affordability or other type of projects where our work aligns with their work and we're not in conflict. I think that would be good for all of us to understand the biggest partner in the community, what they're doing. So that would be one of my asks is, can we get a current, and they have the ability, I think, like us, to change their designations to the end of December of '24, but at least get a current listing and a discussion. The second, Mr. Dillon, you raised a point of our infrastructure budgets were put in place for some of these infrastructure a few years ago, so they're probably underfunded. It would be good to reset the numbers for some of these infrastructure ones to current day dollars. I don't know how these were set to begin with, if we had to go get an external input, or if we have internal knowledge to say the roof and the various line items down here in the white.
So the shovel-ready projects that we haven't designed through the architect or engineer, they'll give us some rough estimates going forward.
Yeah.
So, I mean, on one of the first bids that we already put out, we've already seen the cost for a parking lot of the ring road double in cost from the original estimate. So these numbers are going to be tried to discuss. Me and member Ruland have had a discussion, CIO Little and Administrator Sorrell. We're very close to having to present to the board a owner's rep that will oversee a bunch of these projects and actually put eyes on this, and with his past experience will also be able to give us some realistic numbers towards it. So in saying that, I don't feel this is a board that likes to kick the can down the road. As Mr. Sorrell stated, in about 8 years, how we pay for facilities stops with the funding. So I think this is a time where we need to address how this county takes care of its facilities, whether it's even being for, like suggested, for the new Health and Human Service campus. Do you continue to budget a small line item in there for continual maintenance? That's how they would pay for it. We need to address the structural deficiency that we have in maintaining our buildings. And it might be an uncomfortable conversation, but it needs to be had before a board in 8 years. I don't want to say let that board handle it. It needs to be handled now, course corrected, and go forward. So I think those are conversations that some of us have had. I know me and Mr. Sorrell have had those, and it's a conversation we need to find. And I think it would be appropriate, and staff would appreciate it, if we had some hard, here's how we're funding it, instead of just this tax line at revenue. So those are conversations that I want to pursue here coming up just after we get through some of these other hurdles. Member Allison? And I'll prepare the board. There will be some serious conversations about the jail here, probably sooner than later, out of necessity. Mr. Couch.
I'd like to address an issue. I'm looking on your sheet here. Who determines premium pay, and who determines what an essential worker is?
That was defined in the act. And then the U.S. Treasury has issued guidance that helps us interpret what the Congress wrote. And I don't have those memorized right off the top of my head, but there is specific language that we would follow to if we were going to use money for that purpose, we would follow those guidelines.
Well, the reason I'm saying is I've been talking to, I don't know how many people on this board have talked to the people that's like grooming your grounds, taking care of your statues out there, working on the fountain areas and all that stuff. I don't know how many has ever talked to these guys, and they're kind of underpaid talking to all of them. And everyone I've talked to so far loves their job, but the pay is not there. And when it says premium pay, are they considered a non-essential worker?
So that would be subject to collective bargaining, and the bargaining unit that represents those team members, that's currently an open negotiation. So we're at the table with that bargaining unit right now. Like I said, I don't have the language in front of me in terms of how essential employees are defined in the federal act and the guidance. So Mr. Kelch, I don't know if they would be qualified or not. We did, this board did provide funds to every county team member who was on the payroll for at a certain period of time. Back in, we do it in 21 or early 22, late 21, early 22. The exact time frame escapes me. And then so that was, and then we took that from the capital bucket, and then also taking from the capital bucket were a couple other expenses that really are not capital, but the board reprioritized how they wanted to spend those dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Phelan?
I know there was discussion about shifting some responsibilities to a facilities person. What type of role will that person play in these discussions?
So the discussions that we had here for projects and stuff is policy. The prioritizing, they're going to act as an owner's rep because we have more projects than normally. Typically, we only have a handful of projects a year. We'll have over 10 some projects coming, if not more. But we did ask for an assessment of some of the facilities to go meet with an elected official, look at their office, see what's going on, and then give an assessment. They would report to still to the administration, but then he would also report to infrastructure committee or have some sort of report to be given to that. So that's what, when we met envisioning, so we're hoping to have something to give to propose to the board, and it would be a contract to have this individual.
So is this person going to be paid out of ARPA dollars, or what's your thoughts on that? Because if that's the case, then I think it should be reported to executive. Nothing against Phil, but if it's ARPA dollars, it's the executive committee.
So mind you, all the projects that are being funded through ARPA are still going through there, and then we get the report through executive. So I don't want to take the projects out of infrastructure committee, even if the person is being reported. So it is a building thing. But we had talked about multiple different ways, depending. The contractual thing would be an hourly rate. So we could either build it into the project as a management cost, or we could just pay it separately.
Right.
Those are the finer details that still need to be worked out.
Right. And we, just like we do with the Huntington Oaks aged accounts receivable report that goes to both finance and exec, we can generate a report that goes to multiple committees.
Yeah. So this is a professional services agreement. So this is why there's still the contractual things before we can present. Ms. Duncan.
Something here. Okay, a couple of things. I again, back in agreement, I am definitely in agreement with that. Social determinant of health for our society, for bandwidth. But then going further, I just look at that miscellaneous equipment. We're talking about now moving funds somewhere. Has this been determined? I know we're already in year 23, that 1,711,000. Is that fixed already, or on whatever page it is? Where is it? It's under miscellaneous equipment. Is that a capital budget? Capital improvement plan?
So some of that at this time has probably been either put under a purchase order or requisition, or possibly expended, but obviously not all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we can always get a detailed report of breakout of what's in that.
If there's any way there's some of that could be pulled out. And
Right.
But again, in addition, I am in agreement with what Scott is saying in regards to our reserve funds for the future. If we don't plan for today, there is no future for upkeep or anything else. Just like your own personal home, if you don't set aside funds, you know, for the future, when it comes that time, there's nothing there and everything falls apart. So I am in agreement to having funds set aside to that place, going to that place of reserve funds for the future for that.
So
And I would like to have something looked at as far as that miscellaneous equipment. If we're right now, we're talking about just finding a place, moving funds, making something happen. We're not talking about where we want it to go. Because I definitely would like to see bandwidth, social determinant for our health.
I think once we get the broadband report, that we'll probably have another discussion going forward. But this at least gets us to
right. So real quick to your correct team that's sitting over on the sidelines, an answer specifically to the 1.7 million, Ms. Duncan. So all of that has either been encumbered or spent. It is almost entirely off-highway equipment for the highway department. So wheel loader, chip spreader, those types of
Already
pieces
there.
of equipment.
That's understandable, yeah.
good question. Thank you, Ms. Duncan.
Okay.
Any other further discussion? Mr. Renault.
Thank you. This is just a comment that I've been thinking about since I asked my first question. And it's also to kind of issue a challenge to us all. Sometimes when I look at the numbers that we look at, before I get on this board, I didn't think about $1 million other than I wish I had it. And sometimes these numbers are just so huge that you kind of, it makes other numbers seem smaller. And I hate to call you out on this, Scott, but you had mentioned on the response to my question, it was just a small six-figure contract. And I don't know if you meant small six-figure, meaning closer to 100,000 than 900,000.
Maybe I should have said low six-figure. Maybe it would have been a better choice of words.
Right, but it just got me thinking that 6 figures is a lot of money. But in the scheme of things, when you're looking at multiple millions of dollars, it doesn't. But 6 figures adds up if you can cut it off here and there where we can maybe build it up and put it towards maintenance or something like that. So I just wanted to issue that challenge to us, whether it was just the wrong word or not, that 6 figures is a lot of money to me. So that's all.
Thank you, Member Rosenbaum.
I just have a favor to ask to Scott or whoever's writing the reports up. We use a lot of acronyms on here, and I have no idea what they mean. As a matter of fact, I asked the sheriff on one of them. He wasn't sure it was on the jail, and he had to call in. If some of these, here's a good one, the JDC MEPS. If we could spell that out just so I know what it means.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's just that we have so many of them, and acronyms in my field and acronyms in somebody else's field mean completely different things. And I like Member Renault. I appreciate what you just said, because my dad used to say $1 here, $1 there. Pretty soon it's $10 and it's $100, and it adds up quick. So if we can, everything needs to be scrutinized, and I am so happy we have a board here that if one of us doesn't catch it, the other one is, and I want to compliment you all on the way you guys are catching on to the stuff today. I'm just proud to be a part of it, and I hope I can keep up with everybody.
So, Paul, the MEP one is one I can answer because I looked at a blueprint that said it every day. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing. Member Ricker?
I guess you, Mr. Chairman, you brought up a comment regarding the jail will need to have more discussion. I'll just throw some thoughts out there and won't get into it today, but I think there's a lot of dollars out here for the jail, the older portion, the newer portion, the roofs, the mechanical, and we're not utilizing the whole facility today. We really need to kind of take a bigger look around that as to say, do we need the whole facility? Do we downsize, remove part of it? Do we get into collaborative relationships with other counties and provide common services to better utilize the jail, more revenue services, whatever. So I want to be cautious before we go down through here and say, okay, we put the mechanical in, we put the plumbing in, we got a half a roof on, and then, well, maybe that wasn't the right direction. Maybe the right direction from a higher level strategy is to do something different with how we operate and run and utilize what we know today as the jail. And I don't know where that fits in a work stream or a work team to sit down and talk about what's possible and what's not. I know just enough to know that I think there's something there we can talk about, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to make maybe a better decision, not kick the can down the road, but make a better longer term decision on that facility and the neighboring facility called the JDC, which, you know, we have some budget challenges. So I kind of would ask, let's look at those two and say, on a bigger picture, what should we be doing as a county strategy and a plan longer term? I don't know the answer, but I'd like to at least.
So a lot of those discussions have already been starting at the starting level to at least bring something to discuss to the board. So they got to start somewhere, but we're starting to have those conversations, whether it be, I don't want to say too much, but they're started, and I'm happy to talk to you offline. Any other questions? Seeing none, meeting adjourned.